Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the Modeling Toolkit. The Modeling Toolkit is a summarized version of most of the modeling tools that we use to affect changes on our objects. So the Modeling Toolkit is found by clicking on this first sign here, this first icon. So we have the Modeling Toolkit. Now, the Modeling Toolkit has the first thing we see is the multi-components. That is all these components we can use right now. This is the object mode. So, but if you want to access the components of the of our object, there are various ways we can do that. We can come in here and select this option. Then we can access components based on either points or edges or faces. So this is faces, this is edges, so, and this is points. Okay, so we can access it from there, or from the Modeling Toolkit here we can click on points to access points. We can click on edges, this one, to access the edges. We can click on this to access the faces. This is to access the UV texture, so we'll get into that later. Other way to do that is to right click on the object and access the edges here, or the vertices or points, then the faces. Okay, so multi-components will help us access all at the same time. So if I click on multi-component, you see all of them are selected. Means I can select edges or faces or vertices. Okay, so this, let me zoom in so you see that faces, edges, vertices. So I can access vertex and I can play around with that vertex. I can access a face, play around with that face. Okay, can access an edge and play around with that edge. Okay, so that's the essence of the multi-components and this Modeling Toolkit. So it's kind of like a brief or summarized version for us to quickly get into things. So here we have the pick marquee. That is, how do we select the objects? By picking, or just marking around. So if I go into vertices now, I can pick marquee and select with that, just like using the quick selection, the normal selection tool. Now, what of the drag? The drag is a different kind of selection. I drag and pins across an object for them to be selected. Okay, I can't, it's not a marquee kind of selection, it's just a drag. Okay, then if it's faces, I'm selecting the same thing. You can see it has this kind of target sign, so when I drag, it just helps me to make selections on specific things. So maybe I just want to make that kind of selection, so that's why the drag will be used. It will be harder for me to use a normal marquee because I won't get this shape I'm looking for. Okay, so the next kind of selection that is variable here is the tweak marquee. Now the tweak marquee is very interesting. Let me come into multi-components. Now with the tweak marquee, I don't necessarily have to select the object close by. I don't have to pick it first to move it around. I can come here, and when I'm close enough to the object, I can just click and drag, and it affects whatever I pick up without necessarily having to come close to the object. Once I hover over the object and I can see that line being selected, so even if it's a singular face like this, I want this face selected, I don't need to come and click on it. So I can just come close here and click and drag. So you can see it's like a magnet pulling the face around to where I am. Okay, if I make selections of objects around my tool, I can come in here and let me select this one as well. I can come in and click and it follows me. I don't need to be on the tool. So that's one of the things about the tweak marquee. It just helps me make a selection without having to come to the face of the tool and or come to the move or rotation tool and do that. So if I go on this one, I can now rotate it based on the tweaking and stuff. Okay, so let me undo all that. I'm using Z to undo, to redo. So it's just like clicking on this or this, or come to edit and undo or redo. So Control Z or Z will undo, Control Y will redo. So if I do Control Y, for instance, it will redo what I did. Control Z will undo. Okay. All right. So that's the difference between the three of them: pick, drag, and tweak. Okay. All right. Then now we have what we call camera-based selection. Camera-based selection right now is off, meaning that if I select like this, I won't only select this portion of my sphere. If I rotate around, you see I've gone around and selected also at the back, and that's because camera-based selection is off. When camera-based selection is off, you can make a selection and you'll be selecting the front and the back of the object. It's handy sometimes, but sometimes it's not. So I can come in here and turn the camera-based selection on and do that same selection. But now when I go through around, I cannot see any selection at the back, because camera-based selection means only select what my camera is seeing at the moment. So when I drag, I'm not afraid that I'll select the back, because the back will not be selected. Okay. But if my camera-based selection is off and I drag and select like this, and I definitely know I've selected the back as well. Okay. So then symmetry on and off. Symmetry is just basically the fact that when I make a selection, it will select it on the opposite side, either on the X, the Y, or the Z axis. So if I go on the object Y and I do a selection like this, it will select the Y option as well, and you can see these blue lines now. Normally, without the symmetry on, if I want to select an object, I'll only see one square and I can pick one square. But with the symmetry on, like on the X-axis, when I hover, you see the symmetry. This is the X-axis. The X-axis is facing this angle. So let me turn around and show you that based on the X-axis, the symmetry is pointing and trying to select. So maybe I'll select, like create an eye of this guy, and I select this way. I can now push in that point. So they have their uses. If I do object Y, that means the symmetry will be selecting up and down based on how I want to select. The symmetry Z was like the X, it will pick up the Z axis for me. Okay, so just based on where the axis is facing, that's what symmetry goes. That is the objects, and we have the world Z, or we have topology. Topology is the face of the model, the mesh. Okay, so I'll turn off symmetry. So then selection constraints and transform constraint based on what we are doing. So I will use them in later points. I don't want to go too much explanations. So, but then all these other tools are tools that we'll use in our modeling. They will help us to model. So let me delete this object and create a cylinder. So cross create cylinder based on my interactive creation. Okay, so now I want to do a little modeling exercise using this component here. Okay, first of all, let me reduce the amount of subdivisions for this cylinder. So come into poly cylinder and reduce it to something like let's do 8. Let's do 8. Go back to our modeling toolkit. Okay, so we want to select faces. I want to select all these faces. So I want to select all these faces, so I can use my drag and pick that guy. So I am doing that. I have to be sure that nothing is on selected, okay, because my camera base selection is on. Okay, so first I want to do an extrude. Let's see what that does. So if I click on extrude, I have some options to extrude. So if I click on the arrow of the extrude, it will pull up on the z-axis. The z-axis is actually the front axis of where the object is pointing up. So I'm going to use my pick marquee for this, and I'm going to drag up, and you see it creates an extrusion from there, back points. Okay, then I can now use my rotate tool and twist the extrusion. Okay, all right, then I go to extrude again. This time I click on the box on top of the arrow, then I scale it in. Okay, then I click on extrude and pull up. So the way the extrusion tool works is for every new extrusion you have to click on the tool again. So, and that's how it works in Maya. All right, then I can now twist this one again, maybe in a different direction. Okay, then I come here, extrude, click on the box, go in, click on extrude, go upwards again. All right, then I'm going to click on extrude, click on the box, go in, click on extrude. I'm just using extrude for now. Then I can push inward, just come down to have this kind of insets. Okay, click on extrude again, click on the box, go in, then click on extrude and pull up. Then I can now click on bevel to bevel that point. So we'll use all these tools while in our modeling section. So just trying to use create an exercise doing this. So you can now see with the bevel I've now created a smooth end at this point rather than the sharp end, and that depends on how many segments I make the bevel. I can decide that from here or using my attribute editor and change the amount of segments on the bevel. So if I increase the amount of segments on the bevel, you see the segments getting smoother. The more the segments, the smoother it gets. The less the segments, the harder it gets. So I can make it together. Then I can increase the fraction of the bevel as well to make it have either a more rounded mouth or make it have a sharp a flattened head but rounded edges, you know. So depending on what object I want to create. So I think I want to create this rounded edge. Then the depth of the bevel is just right here. So basically this is how we use the modeling toolkit to access tools that we will normally get from here, the bevel, extrude, from all these mesh tools and stuff. So what this means is this first 4 sets is a summary of the objects the tools that my objects will use as a whole, not from the component mode. That is this first section here. So on this first section where we have mesh here, that's where we have this section. So you see combine, separate, boolean, and smooth. We'll find them under the mesh menu. We have combine, separate, we have booleans, we have smooth. Okay, then for this section that works on the components, this works on the mesh as a whole. This works on the components of the mesh. Okay, and I told you that we'll talk about, we'll be measuring some. So what is a mesh? If we come back to our tool, say we have a mesh here. So what is a mesh? A mesh is a collection of vertices, edges, and faces that describe the shape of a 3D object. So that's what we talk about when we say a mesh. All right. Okay. Back to Maya. Then components. That means I want to work on components of the mesh. That is these components, either the vertices, edges, or faces. And where will I find that? Here on that edit mesh, to edit the mesh or edit the mesh. So I will have the bevel, the bridge, I will have the extrude, and I'll have the add divisions, just like here. So it's kind of a summarized version of things that are mostly used, most commonly used. Then we have tools. What are these tools? Tools are things that help us subdivide the components, things that will help us cut through the components, mostly cutting through. So we have the multi-cuts, target weld, the core draw, and connect. So these tools are found under mesh tools here. So we have them here. So what are they used for? Like if I use the multi-cuts tool, it will make me create kind of a cut here and a cut here, and make me create a line across the object, okay, or a cut to create another subdivision. Okay, so they are commonly used tools, okay. So that's what they are used, and the options of the multi-cuts appear, or whatever tool you select will appear here. Okay, all right. Then so there are things we'll go through in our modeling class, so I won't want to go too deep into them right now, but that's what the modeling toolkit does. It just opens up tools that we can use to edit our model